Back with you tonight. Now, the Western Cape government says Police Minister Begitele has failed to acknowledge the role played by its police task force in reducing crime in the province. It added that Nyanga is no longer the country's murder capital after it deployed 73 of its law enforcement advancement plan officers to the area. It said its officers made 2,500 arrests on various crimes, including possession of illegal firearms, ammunition, dangerous weapons, and drugs between April and August this year. Western Cape Provincial MEC for Community Safety and Police Oversight joins us now for more on that story. MEC Allen, good evening, and thank you very much for your time and for joining us tonight here on In Focus. Well, one would say, I mean, in a roundabout way, he kind of did acknowledge some of the other players. I see here in his speech he's saying cumulative deployment of thousands of officers of SAPS supported by other forces from the city, metro and province each week conduct crime combating and prevention operations. So pointing to the fact that there are, of course, some other forces that are particularly helping here. But he seems to be pinning a lot of the crime situation, especially when we're talking extortion and kidnapping, on police going rogue.
Thank you so much, Tabu, for this opportunity. I think the National Minister of Police missed an opportunity to even invite us to today's engagement. I remember fondly, in October last year, during a public engagement in my hometown of Mitchell's Plain, I served as the chairperson of the standing committee, and the National Minister made a firm commitment in front of the media, in front of the public, that he will invite the Western Cape government to engagements whenever he is in this province. Sadly, again, that has not happened. It has not happened for a number of times. And last week, I was with the National Minister of Police during the MEC engagements. And again, the Minister echoed that he is wanting to work with us. We are needing to work together. However, we were again not invited. But today was a clear example in terms of when we consider, and the Minister is correct in saying that murder increased in our province by 0.2%. At a national level, it actually increased by 11.5%. And in the stations, the precincts where LEAP officers were deployed, the murder rate actually reduced 8.2%. Nyanga, no longer the murder capital. Kraaifontein, Elsies, areas like Khayelitsha, we are seeing, although there's still too many murders, because one murder is still too many murders, but the reality is that we are seeing the successes, and I'm delighted that the National Minister has, in a small way, made reference to those operations, but I firmly believe on the ground we are seeing the successes of the LEAP, because they are compensating for the lack of resources in terms of the South African Police Service, but also strengthening the hand of the South African Police Service.
Let's look at Nyanga itself. Though the Minister acknowledges that there are pockets of success, there are equally pockets of concern, particularly the Nyanga police station in Cape Town, which he says ranks as #1 in the top 30 contact crime stations in the country.
We have seen that during the past 4 quarters for the last year, we have seen that the murder rate in Nyanga systematically being reduced. 3 months ago, the brigadier responsible for Nyanga got a promotion and he was shipped out of the Western Cape, and he now finds himself in the Eastern Cape. We have seen that knock-on effect because over this last 3 months we have seen a steady increase. Obviously, I'm also deeply concerned when there is no clear retention of SAPS members, credible SAPS members that are doing amazing works in precincts, and if there is no clear leadership that is coming up, then that's also a gap in a vacuum that needs to be filled. But Nyanga and the work we do with CPFs, the work we do with the neighborhood watches, and with law enforcement, Metro Police, and the SAPS in that particular area has reached successes. We still have a way to go, because I am concerned when I look at the rape amounts in the area, also the amount of muggings and assaults that do happen, and that whole of society approach is so needed for an area like Nyanga, like we've even seen in areas like Mitchell's Plain and Khayelitsha.
Yeah. The minister seems to be pointing to the fact, and probably this is directed directly at you, even though you are not part of this particular briefing, that there needs to be a cleaning of house, especially in the province. He says restoring the trust deficit between the community and the SAPS will need the police service to clean house in the province.
Yes, most definitely. We've seen the work of the police ombudsman, for example. And this is the only province, Tabu, that has, in terms of the Western Cape Community Safety Act, actually established an office of the police ombudsman. General Brandt, a former SAPS general, was the previous ombudsman, currently General Reddy, also a previous cluster commander, currently the ombudsman, and the work they do in highlighting the inefficiencies in the South African Police Service in order for remedies to be implemented so that the service can actually be one that serve and protect and ultimately look after communities. So we have seen whenever there is any measure of mistrust or corruption within the South African Police Service, even less crimes are reported. We know that rape is one of the crimes that are the most underreported, but we are fearing that even other forms of crime are being underreported because SAPS are not helping as they should be. And the under-resourcing plays such a vital role. My one big concern as well is that for those SAPS members that are working under very difficult circumstances and in chronic under-resourced environment, coupled with a 10% vacancy rate. Some stations are standing with a 17% vacancy rate here in our province. And what we are calling for is for the devolution of the South African Police Service, because we've seen when we use data, and the COVID experience has been used in order to pinpoint where murders are happening. Because during COVID, Tabu, we were able to then pinpoint a spreader event, if it was a nightclub, if it was a church, or any event that took place in order to remedy that particular situation, provide the intervention and safeguard that area. And that same data is now being used in order to ensure where we deploy the LEAP officers in order for them to have maximum impact, but also not only displace crime, but make criminals vulnerable because they are in certain communities, and we obviously need to make sure that they are arrested, but that the arrest actually leads to a conviction. So we are calling that SAPS should be devolved to a provincial level, whereby it is closer to the people and choices are not made all the way in Pretoria. Tabo, I think it's common knowledge that crime in different provinces are different. That is clear. We have gangsterism, drug abuse in our province, and it's totally different to other province like the Northwest, for example. So we need national policing policy to be implemented so that the Western Cape government would have greater control and management of the South African Police Service, ensure that we are able to not only ensure that the staff morale is where it needs to be, but ultimately ensure that resources are not skewed. We have in some of our areas a police to population ratio of 1 officer for close to 1,000 people, and that's in an area like Halicha. And in another area like Claremont, it would be 1 officer for every 350 residents. Yeah. So there is a skewed allocation that was, in terms of the Halicha precinct, found to be discriminatory during the 2018 commission into the Halicha area.
Talk to me about the interventions then when it comes to kidnappings. The Western Cape Police investigating 32 cases of kidnappings just between March and September of 2022. It seems there are some inroads that are being made by the SAPS in the province as far as that is concerned. But how are you ramping that up?
In terms of our engagement with the South African Police Service, and this is one matter that I've been extremely clear about. The one thing is that although we have seen kidnappings in the last quarter reducing, it is still alarming that there's a number of media reports that is indicating that kidnappings is on the increase, even though the data shows us that it's actually being reduced. But what we need is for crime intelligence to play a bigger role. Our crime intelligence should be jacked up. We should ultimately ensure that it is curbed even before it happens. But when it happens, the 72-hour activation plan is so vital, and that resources are deployed, and that crime intelligence gather information, get information from community members or from any person that could have information that lead to the rest of those culprits. But what we need to do and what we need to see is that there is convictions. Whenever there's a conviction, it's a strong deterrent to would-be criminals. Because the fear also is, Tabu, like I've indicated earlier on, that there could be a number of underreporting in these type of matters because many in our communities might feel that they do not trust the South African Police Service to that extent. But we are actively participating in terms of the provincial command center and the joint operations. We would ideally want to see a dedicated task team that is set up with operational powers between the South African Police Service and the City of Cape Town and Metro Police so that they can jointly work together in order to ensure that kidnappings do not happen. But if it happens, we must make sure that those responsible are held to account and that they are convicted and that they land up behind bars.
Now, I mean, judging from the speech by the police minister, and I think you'll tell me here, he says the continued injection of policing resources from Pretoria, clearly indicating that he's not about to support this call that you're making for devolution, that the resources will still come from Pretoria, be it personnel or funding into the Western Cape community. It is starting to change the crime picture. From according to the minister, he's patting himself in the back here, saying the injection of resources is what is resulting in the kind of turnaround that you're seeing there.
On the one hand, the national minister is making those comments. On the other hand, he is lamenting crime stats that's increasing in an area like Nyanga. There is a mismatch of information that do come from the national minister. What we would ideally want to see is that in terms of community safety, and in the legislation, Tabu, we have a mandate in order to have our oversight role. And that oversight role is legislated, but also there's a process called the policing needs and priorities. And year on year, Tabu, we submit our policing needs and priorities report to the National Minister of Police, and that needs and priorities should be taken into account when resources are allocated. And year on year, we are not seeing that the policing needs and priorities of this particular province is taken into account when it comes to budgeting, when it comes to the allocation of resources. So even if there is an extra 200 members that are sent by the national minister to be part of a particular team, there's over 2,000 people that is vacant within our province. So it doesn't meet the requirements that is actually needed. Our needs are not being met, which ultimately means that the needs of the residents and communities are in constant fear because from a national level, those needs and those priorities are not taken into account. So it's a clear mismatch. We are continuing in our call. The Premier has been adamant in this regard that should the Western Cape receive provincial powers in order to manage and control the South African Police Service, we would be able to not only ensure that SAPS fulfill its mandate, but make also sure that the resources are allocated accordingly, but that we should be able to then see that crime is reduced. I've spoken to so many SAPS members on the ground, and if you hear them, they are demoralized. Many of them are working under extreme difficult circumstances. Our detectives, Tabu, sitting with a caseload of 250 dockets on average per detective. And that is humanly impossible in order to attend to all of those particular cases. Hence, cases are not landing up in court, and then criminals are not prosecuted. And the more that is increasing, it emboldens criminals and they become more brazen because ultimately they feel that they can get away with crime. So we obviously need to have our needs and our priorities be taken into account, because if the national minister says that he's putting resources here, but if we look at the needs and the priorities, it's not being met. Someone might need a 10 Rand, Tabu, and now you give the person a 2 Rand 50, or you give them a 1 Rand 50, and then you think you are giving them resources, but they actually need the 10 Rand to get to where they need to be.
MEC, I appreciate your time. Let's leave it there for tonight. That is MEC for Community Safety and Police Oversight there in the Western Cape, Reagen Allen.